Welcome back, everyone. My name is Robin Runge. I use she, her pronouns, and I have the privilege of being the chair of the ABA Civil Rights and Social Justice section, which you probably know if you've been watching these chair chats all year. And part of my privilege in that position is to get to interview amazing legal scholars and litigators in the United States who are also leaders in the section. And that is exactly what I get to do today. And our conversation could not be more timely. I am joined here by my friend and colleague, Paul Smith, who, for the purposes of this conversation, I'll lift up first, is the secretary of the ABA section of Civil Rights and Social Justice section. I might have something to do with that, and I'm thrilled that he is. But I'm also going to share a little bit more of his background, and I'm sure he's going to share more with us about his organization, because today's conversation is really going to be focused on voting rights. Which is such an important, as I said, critical issue all the time, but definitely in recent years and this year in particular. So Paul is the senior vice president at the Campaign Legal Center, where and he's had just an amazing, Paul, I just want to say it's a privilege to be in space with you. You've just had such a tremendous career and done so much
Thank you.
for all of us. But he's been working in litigation on these issues and related issues for 4 decades, and has argued before the Supreme Court 21 times, and has written extensively, has many victories from those arguments. Importantly, one of those cases was Lawrence v. Texas, the landmark gay rights case, and Brown versus Entertainment Merchants Association, which established First Amendment rights for those who produce and sell video games. So we really do have an expert. He also, importantly for this conversation, has argued several voting rights cases in the Supreme Court, including Veith versus Jubileer, I'm going to mispronounce that, and Gill versus Whitford involving partisan gerrymandering, and Lulac versus Perry involving legality of Texas's mid-decade redrawing of the congressional districts, and Crawford v. Marion County Election Board involving the constitutionality of a voter identification law. So there's more, but I'm going to stop there. I just wanted to lift up those few examples because those particular cases and the incredible leadership and work that you've done on preserving our voting rights and frankly fighting to get them back is just so incredible. And the work of the center is amazing. And I just, again, just as a friend and as a citizen of the United States, want to thank you for the work you're doing. And I think
Thank you, Robin. That's way over the top. I
no, it's
appreciate it.
not. It's not. We're sitting in the middle of it. So Paul, I just want to start by having you share a little bit, because I know the center hasn't been around forever, right? So share a little bit about its focus and its work, and then highlight, and dig deeper into some of the things that I've raised, or maybe some other things that you want to make sure that we're thinking about when we think about voting rights.
The Campaign Legal Center started about 22 years ago, really as a campaign finance organization that was started by Trevor Potter, who was McCain's lawyer to defend the McCain-Feingold reform of the campaign
Right.
finance law. And over the years, the portfolio broadened to cover all the other major issues that are threatening or challenging American democracy. So we have a voting rights department, we have a redistricting, gerrymandering department, we have a government ethics department. In addition to the campaign finance, we're still probably the most active, in fact, certainly the most active litigators on campaign finance, which has gotten to be a tough area of the law, given the way the Supreme Court has been ruling in recent years.
Right.
But we keep pushing on that too. And so I came over there about 7 years ago, 7.5 years ago, when there was this election in 2016 and democracy seemed somewhat threatened. And have been working there along with teaching at Georgetown for that period. And the organization has grown tremendously during the last 7 years. My real assignment was to build litigation capacity, and we went from a few lawyers up to about 50 now. It really is quite a massive
Wow.
team, focusing on those 4 areas: voting rights, gerrymandering, government ethics, and campaign finance. But then, of course, in this year, we effectively have a fifth department, which is trying to prevent the next election from being stolen by those who would try to steal it if they don't win fair and square. as almost happened, in the last election. And so we have a whole team of people who are really, really focusing on trying to make use of the law to stop that. And I can tell you more about how we're doing that. Unfortunately, you can't just bring a lawsuit against Mr.
I
Trump and
was
say,
gonna ask how you read my mind, or maybe my face, because that was what I was thinking. I was like, so I'm thrilled you're doing that because, right, the safe, right, passage from one administration to the next one is one of the most sacred pieces of our democracy. And yet we
kind of
learned,
important. Yeah.
yeah, when it works. And recently learned how it might not. But you raise a really good point for us as lawyers, which is how do you prevent that in the future? And again, prevention, I don't think people think of law as a preventive tool, by the way. I think they just don't, generally. And then I think the
From
other
where I'm sitting, that's what you try to do. Yeah.
exactly. And so I think teach us a little bit here, as you do at Georgetown, and help us understand just that. Let's start with that last piece, right? Which is
Right.
how do we
Sure.
make sure that the next transfer of power is done correctly?
Well, we learned a lot in 2020 about the vulnerabilities of the system, some of which we had anticipated then. And I was involved in litigation around the election in December of 2020 in Wisconsin and other places.
Right.
And so the first thing we did coming out of all that experience was to say we got to fix federal law. This thing called the Electoral Count Act that governs how you get from the election to the inauguration through our weird jury rig system of electors and meeting of Congress and stuff like that. And so we remarkably were able over 2 years to craft and then pass the Electoral Count Reform Act, which had the support of Democrats and Republicans on the Hill, McConnell and Schumer. And it does a lot of things to prevent the kinds of problems we had last time. It makes it clear who gets to certify the electors for each state. So
Right.
you're much less likely to have two sets of electors from any state. It makes it clear much harder for Congress to object when the electoral votes show up there.
Hmm.
It clarifies that the vice president's role is only ceremonial. So it does a lot of things to govern that process and give us tools. A lot of those tools, of course, rely on the courts ultimately, because when you have to choose between Congress and the courts, even Congress said, "Well, we'll take the courts."
Right.
But
Right.
the courts themselves are problematic, as we have seen quite recently. The Supreme Court not being an entirely reliable, neutral party
Arbiter.
on this election, I'm afraid. But
Yeah.
we have we have the courts we have. At least the law is better. So what do you do after that? Well, what we have is we focused on 5 states, 5 of the key swing states where we think the kinds of manipulation and problems could arise. When it's close, it's much more likely that the Trump forces will try to steal it if they haven't won it. And so Arizona, Nevada, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, we've invested millions and millions of dollars as an organization in having people on the ground. We have lobbyists, we have communications firms, we have local counsel, we have staff that go in and try to work in coalition with all the state level good government groups. And what are all these people doing? Well, they're trying to send a message that the system works and people should trust it. They're trying to send a message to the state's politicians to just follow the rules.
Hmm.
They're getting ready. They're fixing state law to comply with the new federal law and to have other safeguards.
Hmm.
And this effort has been somewhat successful in some states more than others. Arizona, remarkably very good. Michigan, very good. Wisconsin's a complicated state, but anyway, the other thing that's happened that's positive is in 2022, a lot of the really terrible election deniers who were running for office in those key swing states lost. They lost
Hmm.
narrowly, but they lost. So we have
Hmm.
people to work with in Arizona, in Michigan, in Pennsylvania, in Wisconsin, that are not there to try to help the steal happily. So
Yeah.
I guess what ultimately all of that means is we have a lot of resources in place to try to deal with whatever happens, but it's very difficult to anticipate the exact nature and location of what the steal would be, whether it's going to be violence, whether it's going to be mass challenges to voters, and all of that.
Yeah.
Even now, in the lead up to the election, there are all kinds of lawsuits being filed by the RNC to try to get people purged from the rolls,
Amen.
claiming that absentee ballots can't be counted if they come in after election day, which is completely contrary to the law. Well, really, what they're almost trying to do is not so much win these cases as create things for them to complain about after the election, which is kind of part of the playbook. You have to be able to tell your people, well, this is why we lost and it's not fair.
Right,
Uh,
right.
so
Now,
of course, all of this depends on the assumption that Trump won't win a majority in the Electoral College, which
right.
here we are on July 3rd, 2024. He may very well be able to do.
Yeah,
In which case, our whole effort is really for naught. We're not there to try to steal it back from Mr. Trump. We're there to prevent a steal, and I don't anticipate the Democratic forces doing anything illegitimate to try to steal the election. So we'll just have to wait and see whether this entire effort ends up not being needed precisely because the country decided on its own, this is the person we want. We'll
yeah.
see.
No, I really appreciate you laying all that out because, I think so many of us are like, we keep getting swept along, right? And I remember
Yeah,
when that legislation was introduced, and I remember being thankful that someone it's like we had a stress test of our system, right? Of a kind that we had never anticipated. And as you know, I also teach part-time, and I can't tell you, for weeks I had students coming into my class, which is not on this topic at all,
no,
because I have no expertise, and say to me, Professor Runge, can this happen? Can he do that? And I would be like, apparently, you know what I mean? Like, I didn't have a good response. And the point is, we learned how much of our democracy and our systems were based on assumptions about the persons who were in these positions. I don't know how else to say
right.
that. And
And
so
customs and practices that are not enforceable.
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly, because everyone was turning to us as lawyers and saying, "What do what about the law?" And then you start to realize the law's not helping us. We don't have the tools we need, and so and I think I just want to lift up something you said, which is so important is that had bipartisan support, that legislation,
yes,
because everybody recognized the danger that we were in after that, right? That anybody of any party affiliation in the future, right, could manipulate. They've now gotten a blueprint, right, about how to try to do this. And we needed to shore that up. We needed to identify the gaps, and we need to make sure that we were limiting those opportunities in the future. And so I think that's a really important thing. And then the next thing you mentioned, which I hadn't even thought about, it makes so much sense, is that we have lost trust in our voting system, right? And so a part of what your staff and your organization is doing when you think about going out and targeting those 5 states is really trying to help rebuild people's faith in
right,
this whole system, and which is an overwhelming task on some level, but incredibly important for it to work. We have to believe in it, and that's related to people
right.
exercising the privilege to vote. Yeah.
So how do you do that? What we're doing is for us, for somebody like me going into Arizona and saying you should trust the system and all these claims of fraud or conspiracy theories, that's not going to do any good at all. But
Right.
if you can find trusted messengers who are essentially conservatives, who aren't don't want to be part of the big lie and don't want to be part of the problem,
Right.
they can be very, very trusted messengers. And so, we have found people like that in a number of these states, and we're putting the message out that through those messengers and through others, the local news people are
Right.
trusted. There are
Right.
different ways to get it there, and we're not going to convince all the Trumpists that they should give up on all their beliefs. But if we
Right.
can get 5 or 10%
Right.
of the people to be a little less crazy, it can make, it arguably can make a difference. At least it can't hurt. It's
Yeah.
something you have to try in a time of emergency. We decided we didn't want to leave anything untried because it would be a pity to feel like we could have done more. And so we're doing
Absolutely.
everything we can think of.
No, absolutely. I mean, again, I think that's what we learned. And, I think as a country, we've had a decline in the percentage of the voting population that votes generally.
Mhm.
And compared to other democracies around the world, I know, because I did global work, people are shocked when I share our data. And yet, I was raised, I mean, I remember the day I turn the age to vote. My father put my tushy in the car, as he called it, and we registered me. It was not something that happened when you got when you renewed your driver's license. You had to actually physically go to a place, and there was a deadline that was months before the next
Right.
election. And
Those have been relaxed somewhat
yes, which
happily,
is
but
all good, I have to say. But I just remember, and I lived in rural Southern Illinois, which meant it was a drive. So, I remember all of that, and what an impression it made on me that, wow, in my country, I get to decide. I have a role and a responsibility to vote for my
Mhm.
local mayor, right? From all the way up the food chain. And I
Right.
think now we've not only lost an understanding that that's a privilege and an opportunity instead of a burden, right? We've like moved into that direction. But then also that it doesn't matter, a combination of A, it doesn't matter, or B, it's all rigged anyway, right? We have like all these different messages. And I think I'd love to hear you opine a little bit. One of my worries is, because of all of that, is that we have more people than probably we have in the last few presidential elections who are like, I'm my protest, and I'm going to put that in words, is staying home. And I am really concerned about that. My big thing is, please become an educated voter and vote. That's the
Yeah.
most important thing you can do, but it's very hard after recent.
Well,
um
it's interesting because the last couple of presidential elections, turnout's been high by our standards, the highest
yes,
it's
that's
been in
right.
a long time, inclling among young people,
Young
which is,
people.
it's still not high by comparison to older populations, but it's pretty. It went up because, again, Trump has some impact on people,
That's
and
correct.
people
That's correct. So 16 and 20, you're right.
he brought
Prior
out a
to
lot
that,
of he brought out a lot of voters, and then he brought out a lot of anti-voters.
that's right.
Uh,
That's right.
and so whether we will continue to see that phenomenon this time depends on what happens over the next 3 or 4 months. There
Mhm.
are a lot of disaffected voters now who don't like either candidate, who don't like what's going on in Gaza, who are maybe a little bit forgetful of how terrible things were in the Trump administration. And so,
Mhm.
we'll have to see whether those people get energized and show up to vote. Happily, they don't have to register 6 months in advance like they used to have to do in some states
Well,
if they aren't
that's
registered
true.
now. And most of them probably are registered at this point because they voted last time.
Yeah.
So we'll see. It'll be an interesting next few months. Of course, at least as we sit here today, we're not entirely sure who the nominee of the Democratic Party is going to be. So
Right. Right.
that's an interesting
Yeah.
feature of the
And I
situation we're
think all of these things make it hard, but I just again want to lift up and thank you. Like, again, the work that your organization has led after events in 2020, again, that had bipartisan support. We don't just like have that happen and keep moving. We have to like examine that and say, how do we prevent this from happening again as a society, right? Like, how do we do
right.
that? And so that's prevention unto itself. And then the work that you've been doing since then, right? In addition to that, to bolster that, to make sure that it doesn't happen and that we have a really safe
Right.
transfer of
And,
power.
and another piece of it was these state laws that have been getting passed since
That's right.
2020, trying to suppress a little bit of the vote here, a little bit of the
Mhm.
vote there. We saw
Mhm.
some in Texas, we saw some in Georgia. A
Right.
big battleground is Arizona, where there was a big comprehensive law passed to try to basically to prevent Latinos from voting, making
That's
it
right.
harder if you were born out of the United States, which in Arizona means if you're Latino, to vote by having extra burdens and proofs of this and proofs of that. And a significant chunk of that got held illegal after a major trial we had this last spring, and it's up on appeal to the Ninth Circuit. So that's an example of the kind of fights that have to go on as people try to kind of tailor the electorate to make it a little easier for their side to win.
Mhm.
It's really, it's almost just saddening to me to see how many people in this country are willing to do things because they're anti-democratic, precisely because it makes one side get an advantage.
Right.
It
Right.
doesn't seem like the kind of commitment that we all grew up with, where we were all taught in elementary school that the one thing we all agree on is the Constitution and the democracy. That
Yeah.
we've lost a lot of faith in that, including among young people who I think who have grown up in this last couple of decades
Right.
experiencing democracy as kind of a failure in a lot of cases. They don't perceive it as one of our great strengths, which
Yeah.
too bad.
Yeah. No, well, thank you again. And I think I think the place I want to just punctuate this, ending our conversation is, I was going to ask you, Paul, if there's one thing that you could advise our audience to do, but I'm going to guess, and maybe you can tell me I'm wrong, but is to make sure you're registered and to vote, and
Yeah, it's
at
a
every
four-letter
level.
word, vote.
At every level, right? And I
Yeah,
mean that, right? I mean, I live in the District of Columbia, which means I have limited voting rights in many ways, right? And so my local elections are my Congress, right? And so and it takes work for me to figure out what the school board is, right? And it takes work for me to figure out, but it's
right.
all critically important. And so thank you so much for your leadership on this issue and in the section. It's been a privilege talking with you today and just generally getting to know you. So thank you so much, Paul.
Thank you, Robin. It's a pleasure, and I look forward to working with you all year on this section. Take care.